Now, one area in which the court has been quite active and has upset many Americans is with prayer in schools. In 1962, it struck down a New York state law that required every school day in public schools to start with a non-denominational prayer. In 1963, it struck down a Pennsylvania law that required the reading of selected Bible verses and the recitation of the Lord's Prayer every day in public schools. These decisions were met with a political outcry. Constitutional amendments to overturn them were introduced in Congress, and public opinion registered enormous opposition to these opinions. Now, these constitutional amendments did not pass the Congress, but public opinion has stayed resolutely opposed to the court decisions and in favor of prayer in schools. Nonetheless, the court has continued along these lines. In 1992, for example, it banned prayer at high school graduations for public schools. And then in the year 2000, it banned prayers at football games, at the start of football games, high school football games, again on the notion that organized prayer was coercive. Then again, you might recall there was always President Reagan's comment that as long as there will be exams in school, there will be prayers in school. Another area where the courts have been involved in school deals with curriculum. And here the question is, how much religious content can you teach in school? In 1968, for example, Tennessee had prohibited the teaching of the theory of evolution. The court struck that down. In 1987, Louisiana had tried something different. It said, you can teach evolutionism, that's fine, but you have to teach creationism with it, the theory of the Bible, of the Christian Bible, of the Old Christian and Jewish Bible, of the Old Testament. The court struck that down as well, saying it violated the Lemon Test. There was no secular purpose here. Now, I don't want you to take away from this the notion that schools are deeply hostile to religion. There's lots of room in schools for religious belief and religious groups. Religious groups, like any other groups, have access to schools. They can use school classrooms, they can use them after hours, given whatever requirements the school has for any other group. Clearly, students can gather informally to pray, to read religious texts, and the like, and when appropriate, students can write about their religious feelings, spiritualism, and so forth. Now remember, there's also that other clause, the free exercise clause. Remember, Congress shall not interfere with the free exercise of religion. The question is, when does state action so interfere? Now, you might think this is easy, but it gets complicated fast. And the way the court has tried to deal with this is through a distinction between belief and action. Now, this is a tough one to make, because sometimes one's belief requires action. Some of these cases illustrate it. The case that announced it was an 1878 case that had to deal with Mormons in Utah. Part of the belief of Mormons is the practice of polygamy. That is to say, one man having more than one wife at the same time. What the court said is that Congress can indeed ban that practice. Can't tell Mormons what to believe, but it can ban a practice that is banned for everyone else without interfering with the free exercise of their religion. Another example comes from schools. The Amish people do not want their children to go to school through high school. They say that if you make them go to school through high school, they will drift away from the community. They agreed to let them learn how to read and to do math and to write, but they wanted to remove their children from the schools after the 8th grade. Wisconsin, it turned out, had a law that required students to go to school until they were 16. Many states have similar laws. The court here struck down the law. It said the Amish did have a right to the free exercise of their religion, and it could remove their children, or they could remove their children from schools after 8th grade. Yet another case had to do with an Orthodox Jew in the Air Force who was a clinical psychologist. His belief required him to act, to wear a yarmulke, the small head covering that Orthodox Jews wear. He was disciplined by the Air Force for this because it violated Air Force regulations. Now, it turns out the Congress overturned that by legislation. Perhaps the most noticeable or noteworthy decision here comes from 1990 from Oregon. It's a decision called Oregon v. Smith. And the plaintiff here, the person who brought the suit, Smith, was a Native American who took part in a Native American religious ceremony which included use of the hallucinogenic drug peyote. He lost his job because of this. The use of hallucinogenic drugs violates Oregon law, and he claimed this violated his right to free exercise. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court said no, it didn't. This was the belief-action distinction. He could believe what he wanted, but if he took the drug, that violates the law. Congress tried to overturn that decision in a piece of legislation called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in 1993. What the Congress said is when a claim of free exercise is being made, the legislation adopted must be the least restrictive means of reaching a compelling governmental objective. It may be a compelling objective to prevent people from using hallucinogenic drugs, but in this case, Congress felt there were other means of achieving it. However, the court overturned that piece of legislation recently, arguing that the Congress has no power under the separation of powers to tell it, the court, how to make its decisions. Now think again about the wall here between church and state. Clearly, we believe in a separation of church and state. The United States of America is not to be a theocracy. On the other hand, there are many Americans who hold deeply religious views. And the tension and the challenge we face is how to respect their views without coercing those who have other views in the process. That is one of the challenges this country faces in the 21st century.